Okay, re-recording this because something went wrong with the recording, but this is a talk on free will and libertarianism, looking for free will in all the wrong places, made as a presentation for my examination course in Pedagogy 820A at the Högskolan i Skövde. So what I want to do today is show some of the potential for using Google Hangouts and YouTube to record live talks and save them onto YouTube for later. Determinism is the idea among philosophers and scientists that the state of the universe at any one moment in time fully determines the state of the universe at the next moment in time. Now, most people who aren't scientists or philosophers aren't really worried whether the universe is deterministic or what effect this has on free will, but it's something that philosophers worry about quite a great deal. If the universe is deterministic, then say many philosophers that consequence is that for any given phenomenon, there is one and only one ultimately correct causal explanation. In slogan form, for any given effect, there is one and only one cause. You might already have a concern that for anything that happens, actually, there are multiple equally valid causal stories that you could tell that don't exclude each other. Nevertheless, philosophers are fond of saying that there's one and only one ultimately correct cause for any happening. And this is supposed to be a necessary feature of living in a deterministic universe. This perspective is often taken by so-called reductive physicalists as the only possible view you can have on the nature of the universe. Reductive meaning that people believe that everything about the universe reduces to physical stuff and physical explanations with nothing left over to explain outside of what we understand as physical stuff and physical explanations. That's a reductive account, a reductive physicalism. Now, compatibilism is the view that a deterministic universe is fully compatible with having free will in a substantive sense. And this is actually the majority view among philosophers, I would say. It's the view of Dan Dennett, who's very famous for expounding it in his book, Consciousness Explained. Now, if you accept determinism, if you accept that the universe is deterministic, and if you reject compatibilism, that is, if you are an incompatibilist, therefore you must believe that free will is an illusion. And there are indeed philosophers who claim that free will is an illusion. Dan Dennett is a compatibilist, so he believes that we have free will, but that we live in a fully deterministic universe. As I say, this is the dominant position in philosophy of mind and in cognitive science, including cognitive neuroscience. Dennett writes that determinism is the friend, not the foe of those who dislike inevitability. You might think that what he's doing here, what other compatibilists are doing here, is redefining free will in a fancy sort of way. This is not, so the libertarians would say at least, this is not what most people have in mind when they think of a free will. So Dennett says that having a free will is just that the ultimate cause of the actions, of the choices, is within you rather than out there in the environment. That's enough to be free will on Dennett's account. But I think, and other libertarians would agree, that when people think of making free choices, they really mean that they could have chosen otherwise. So libertarianism, then, is the view that the universe that we live in is probably non-deterministic. At least, say the libertarians, having a free will is incompatible with living in a deterministic universe. So the libertarians, like the incompatibilist determinists, believe that you can't put free will and determinism together. What the incompatibilist determinists do is they get rid of free will. What the libertarians do is they get rid of determinism. So the libertarians say that the universe is in some substantive way non-deterministic, but also, and this is very important, it's also non-random. That is, there is a third way between fully deterministic and random. Something that is in the middle that allows certain agents to generate some spontaneous causal force right in the moment of making a decision or taking an action. So the bottom line, according to libertarianism, is that human beings and other similar agents make choices that really do change the course of events, that set them down one path instead of another, such that they could have chosen otherwise. They could have chosen a different path given no other changes in the physical universe. It doesn't mean that we are non-physical entities. It does not mean that there is some spooky substance in us. It just means that we are able to create some spontaneous causal force in the moment, independent of, ultimately independent of anything else in the physical universe, except for what we decide. The driving intuition here is that the nature of the universe ultimately outstrips what we understand by the word physical. We don't really know what physical stuff is. We don't really know what physical explanations are. This only shows that human cognition is, as we probably should have realized and understood anyway, it's knowably bounded in ways that the universe probably is not knowably bounded. Nevertheless, there is this libertarian bogeyman that scares people. And here I have a quote from William Banks and Susan Pocket with a very typical statement by compatibilists talking about libertarianism. They write that there are still conditions of free will. At one extreme, they say, is libertarian free will, according to which free actions are unconstrained and uncaused by any physical process. Now, the problem with this definition is that it's unclear, to say the least, whether any libertarian takes such a strong position. Tim Kaine, who's one of the most famous libertarians, certainly doesn't. I don't. I'm not a famous libertarian. I don't know of any libertarian who takes such a strong position. So it's not, libertarianism is not claiming that free actions are unconstrained and uncaused, only that they're under-constrained by physical processes. All really that the libertarian needs to say is that our conscious decisions that we make are not fully determined by physical processes in the brain and the environment. They can be substantially causally shaped by, they're not fully causally determined by those physical processes. So what the libertarian does here is, in place of a simple linear causal process from physical processes in the brain and the environment to conscious decisions one way, the libertarian substitutes a circular causal model where events in the brain and in the environment substantially causally shape but do not fully causally determine our conscious decisions. Those conscious decisions then go on in turn to causally shape things in the brain and the environment. It's a circular causal model that we cannot break out of. So what the libertarian suggests replacing determinism with is an approximation to determinism in the form of a propagation of constraints. The theorem here is that in many, if not most contexts, agent actions are sufficiently constrained as to approximate, though Pache, the compatibilist, never quite equate to, the deterministic model of the universe. So every choice we make, it constrains our subsequent choices, and it can leave us with very, very little wiggle room. It doesn't mean that we have no wiggle room, though. That's because, at least in certain circumstances, free agents do have multiple actions to choose among in a way that is not fully causally predetermined. That is, that they are able to generate a little bit of spontaneous causal force in the moment. A corollary to this is that many of the contexts in which we think we have free will, the libertarian is quite happily allowing that we don't actually have free will in many cases where we think we do, at least in any practical sense. We limit our options increasingly. Basically, and all of our previous choices combine together with our past and current circumstances to limit our room for maneuver. they produce what philosophers and cognitive scientists like to call a propagating network of constraints. Every choice point constrains the subsequent choice points. It's like painting ourselves into a corner of a room. How do we get out after we've painted ourselves into the corner? Well, what we do, how we escape, is by changing our perspective, changing our view on the world. This is one of my favorite prints from one of my favorite artists, the Dutch artist M.C. Escher, and it's all about perspective, which is why I chose the picture. So the idea here that I want to put forward is that perspective really is a powerful thing. And indeed, that more than most other conscious or self-conscious mental processes, perspective is relatively causally under constraint. We really can make real choices about how we look at ourselves and the world around us. There is no one correct way to view the world, and there is no one correct way to view most phenomena in that world. What this means is that multiple mutually exclusive perspectives may be equally valid. We don't know how to fit them into one single coherent perspective, but that's just because our cognition is limited. We are left with multiple accounts that we cannot reduce to a single account. We're left with multiple perspectives on the same phenomena, and those multiple perspectives are all equally valid. The bottom line here is that we really can change our minds, and by selecting among the different perspectives on the same circumstances, not necessarily doing anything differently, free agents can and do change their world. Thank you very much.